And of course, I'd forgotten to add myself in. Welcome, everyone. This will be the first in this series of live streams. I'm yet to sort out if we're doing this weekly or fortnightly, but this is going to be a regular thing now on my channel. So hopefully I don't stuff this up too badly. And so far, I think everyone can hear me. So I think the audio is going to have problems later because every live stream needs an audio problem. But welcome today. Oh, hello for those in the chat too. So we've got Peter and Claire, welcome. And anyone else, if you're lurking, let me know. I'm happy to say hi. But what we're going to do today, and in future weeks, I'm going to pick a topic. Today is glowing devils. And then we'll chat about that for a few minutes, and then I'll open it up to questions of any sort. Obviously, questions about today's topic, or any day's topic, will be preferred, or at least given priority, but I'll answer questions on anything because at least this is a small channel, so there's not too many of you. So I'm sure we'll be able to get to pretty much everyone's questions. And I am very lucky today. I have an amazing co-host with me, although normally I'm the co-host over on Polymathic. So welcome, Jen. How are you going?
Hi. Good. Nice and early. Actually, yes. It's nice doing early instead of late.
Yes, normally we're doing evening ones. It's about 11 my time, and we start at 1:30 in the morning. I'm like, why am I still awake?
So, yeah, it's nice to actually be awake.
But yes, we've got nice science backgrounds at least. Although would have been more fitting if we're doing an alien one, which is a topic I have in mind for a future stream today. Although I'm happy to ask or answer specific questions if people have them on it. So we've got a few people there. Oh, we've got few extras, so welcome Krabby, Maya, thanks for joining us, and also Giant Butthole. You're always welcome on this channel, all of you.
I've got to remember I can't swear in your channel.
No, you can swear as long as it's not too frequent, just so it doesn't get you can't show this to kids.
You know I can manage that because I managed it when we did our Science of Santa, so...
Yes, I know you can manage it, though I won't be giving references to your previous stream on this one. But yeah, I think a lot of the people in the chat will know. Yeah, we'll leave that. But yeah, so do you have anything you want to add before we get into today's topic? If not, I am just bringing up. I got a couple.
We'll just head straight into it because yeah, this will be interesting.
Yes, although you're going to have to give me a second while I actually make sure I don't stuff things up in between, because this is the first time. I am hoping this works. There we go. That didn't work too badly. So, and of course, let's actually see if this should work.
Devil, is that?
Yeah. So we're going to do the. So today's topic is about glowing Tasmanian devils, or actually, are they glowing, and is this actually interesting / new? Now, there's a couple of things here. So the first one is, what are we looking at? And then the second one is, well, how did they figure it out? Now, somewhat recently, and by recently, I mean within the last few months, I think there was articles published about it in November. I'm yet to see any papers on it because we haven't quite figured out what's going on. And
yeah, I remember we brought it up briefly on another stream because somebody asked a question and both of us were like, yeah, we haven't read any of that. We knew about it but hadn't read any of it.
Well, I now have read some of it, and there's two words that I want to get to: bioluminescence and biofluorescence, because those are different things. And for the most part, they were good in the articles, but you could tell it wasn't something a lot of the people writing about were familiar with, because they often use them interchangeably, and they're not. They are different things. So we'll get there. But this was the photo that came up. I am taking this from the University of Toledo, I believe it is, that did the research. Sorry, I can't see any notes at the moment, but they showed that they have all this color, and this is under a black light. Basically, they used a camera that had a UV filter, so it had a flash, a UV flash, and then a filter. So they only picked up the light that was reflected or sent back to them when the environment to our eyes was dark. And it surprised them because we didn't think you'd be able to see any features like this on mammals. It's actually really common in fish, but for land mammals, that was unheard of. No one ever would have originally thought that you'd get biofluorescent mammals, particularly Australian ones. But about a month before, well, a couple of weeks before, they actually discovered the same phenomena in other Australian mammals like wombats, and the first one was the platypus.
Yes.
And which I do actually have photos of. So it's not the first one. Oh, is that gone? Is this not going to work for me? No, it's not.
Well, that map.
Yes. Why has this disappeared on me? Sorry, I know I am using PowerPoint. This will fix. Normally, it's actually better than that. I've done this before for teaching. Let's get it. No, I have no idea why it's not moving to the next one. So give me a second to fix that up in the background. Of course, something had to go wrong.
It always does. It always does. Yeah, the platypus was interesting because it was an accidental discovery as well. It was, well, I mean, most of these things are accidental discoveries, but they were actually doing nighttime photography of the platypus and discovered that they were glowing.
It's like, wait, what? Why are they glowing? They should be glowing.
When did platypuses start glowing?
Right, we're going to do this image by image, and hopefully this works. There we go. So there's the wombat. So I haven't got the platypus, which is the original one, but yeah, they start. Although these are taxidermy ones, you can still see they got enough dye there that it actually still makes a difference. And of course, yes, crabby, yes. What would it be without technical difficulties? It wouldn't be a live stream. So
yeah, exactly.
There we go. Oh well. The thing though was that we didn't think any of these animals had kind of perception in this range where this biofluorescence would have made a difference or would have impacted them. So the basis is that it's expanded our understanding. But I said I want to get to those two words because we all think of, animals glowing in the dark. You think of, like fireflies or a lot of sea creatures. Although with most of the deep sea creatures, they don't actually generate the biofluorescent materials. They don't glow themselves. They get it by eating other things that have swallowed bacteria that make those glowing chemicals. So I think most of the blue glowing stuff in the ocean comes from a single bacteria or other microorganism that is common to the food chain. And I remember one study.
That's quite a common thing with lots of things, Matt, though, because I mean, like, people think of the fugu fish, as being a poisonous fish, but it actually isn't. It's a bacteria that it has built up a tolerance to that is poisonous to human beings. So they're actually farming fugu fish in Japan now, and feeding them a different type of bacteria so that they're not building up the thing. So it's not as dangerous when they prepare the fugu because there's no poison in it. So that's a very common thing in nature, that it's actually bacteria that makes these different things, and then whatever eats it gets the effect of.
Yeah, and I know that's the same for the poison dart frogs as well. I think they're not poisonous themselves, but their diet makes them poisonous. So a lot of them do build up these chemicals. They haven't yet figured out if that's where it's coming from, although based on where these colors are, particularly around the eyes and snout, as we saw for the Tasmanian devil, it seems like there is a purpose to it. If you can ascribe a purpose to anything like this in evolution, being careful with the words, but it's still very early days. So I'm curious to see if we'll do a follow up to this story and it'll be like, hey, I figured out why. But this one's still really curious. But as I was saying, most of the glowing stuff that we see in nature that we instinctively think of is known as bioluminescence. That's where a chemical reaction produces light. There's a few of them out there. You think of chemical reactions that produce heat. If you want to think of just burning something, for example, let's set fire to some ethanol, because apparently that's always a fun thing to do. And no, I've never set fire to a lamp. No, I've taken hairs off my arm when the gas for the barbecue didn't light immediately and it built up a bit and then went. But that's.
Please turn the gas off if it's not working.
It was working. It was just I got one and then it built. Anyway, it wasn't too bad. But yes, I learned my lesson. You turn it off if it's not working. At least the one we've got now has a good sparker on it, so it tends to light very quickly. Anyway, Jen and the not really qualified guy. Yes, I'm not qualified yet.
Hi, Jenny.
But will I ever be? Sorry. I will. I am learning how to balance the chat with live streams, but I'm sure you'll all bear with me. And so it's easy to think of getting energy out of reactions, but this is not what's going on here. We have something else. So I'm just going to switch over the image because I want to show a nice little spectrum, because that I think will help. I was wishing I could just click through them because I had a somewhat order in my head. And of course, it's not going to actually work. Oh, now it works. Oh, this would be really, really funny if it actually works when no one's watching. So I just like the laser pointer in PowerPoint because you can actually spot it a little better. Although it's showing the mouse. Okay. So when we think of, well, fluorescence is a particular phenomena where you take in a wavelength. Well, it's a shorter wavelength, so something higher energy. And the molecule loses a bit of energy because it's just vibrating and shaking around. So you can think about losing it to heat. And that gives off a wavelength that's longer. So you take in one photon, you give out one photon of a longer wavelength. Now, it's not always one for one. Some of them will get lost through other pathways. You can think of this as a really complicated maze with several exits. The easiest one is generally the one we'll see most, but it's definitely not the only one. You'll have millions of different things you can do. But for biofluorescence, where you take in that shorter wavelength and you give it out with a material found in biology. No surprise. And that's what these devils are doing. This is also how black lights work. We can't see UV, but these molecules that are doing this are taking UV light in and then spitting out a shorter wavelength that then falls in the visible. So they're basically taking light from here and making it come out here. So that's why we can't see black lights. Hence the name. They're lights that are black because we don't see UV, but we can see what happens when they kind of come back out of objects that have shortened that wavelength. You generally don't go the other way. You can't, with fluorescence, go to a higher energy because where's your energy coming from? There is a cheat where you take in 2 photons and you give 1 out, and you can get shorter wavelengths that way because energy is conserved. And they're actually thinking using that for organic solar cells or regular solar cells because most photovoltaics don't react very well to red light. There's not enough energy. So just take in 2 red photons and give out a green photon or a purple photon or so. And there's a lot of research going into there. So there's a little extra for people. But that's what's going on here. So bioluminescence, the reaction produces the light. Biofluorescence, it just takes the light and changes it into something else. And in this case, it's taking it from a color we can't see and making it a color we can. Anyway, there's my little spectrum. Oh, actually, no, I want to see if this works now. Oh, now it works. There we go. I have not changed anything.
That's a good question to go along with actually what you were saying, Matt. When it converts it down to a lower, because you can go to a lower, but I mean, you don't lose energy. Energy just converts into other forms of energy. So is it a heat loss, or is it do you get 2 photons for the price of 1?
So in fluorescence, you lose it to heat normally. That's the pathway, because what happens is molecules are really complicated, and you can think of them as having, in terms of energy levels, this is where light and color comes from most things. We're talking about absorption, emission.
Yeah,
comes from energy levels that are acting like that. You can think of as a ladder. So you have some ground state. So imagine you're standing on the ground. Then as I add energy in, you go up the rings of the ladder. But like a regular ladder, you can't stand halfway between the 2 legs. You have to go up one by one. If you don't have enough energy to get to the next leg, you're not going to do it.
That's the best analogy I've heard for ages on the shell system of the nucleus. That is awesome.
It's what I teach. So I've had a little bit of practice with this one. It's all about energy, and I don't mean that in a woo way, because yes, there's a lot of woo.
Yeah. So what you've got is you've got your electrons of the person on the ladder, and the electrons that are circulating the nucleus can be in different runs on the ladder, which is the different shell positions that they can be in. And as they absorb energy, they can go up in up in things. So as they absorb photons, the electrons can go to higher levels, and when they come back down, they release a photon and come into a smaller orbit, basically.
Yes. So if you go up, you're putting energy in. If you're coming back down, you're getting energy out, and that's always in the form of light. Normally in the form of light, but
yeah, normally.
The thing is, it gets really confusing because whilst this analogy works for very simple, linear models, in reality, none of the rungs of the ladder are evenly spaced. They actually get closer together the higher up.
And every atom is different, which is a really good thing, for especially in your line of work.
Oh, yes. It's brilliant in my line of work because I want them to be different because it means I can find unique colors for everything, even if they're not ones that we can visually see. But the other thing is that there isn't one ladder either. You've got different ladders sitting offset to each other, and you can go up one ladder and come down a different ladder. And sometimes you can sneak down the side without getting light off, where you just kind of vibrate and shake. That's where we're talking about temperature. But you can go up a couple of the rungs, jump to a lower one, then emit a photon. It gets really complicated. But basically, you lose energy to heat. And that's where you get fluorescence. So that extra energy is taking out of shorter wavelengths because you go from shorter to longer. You're losing energy. The other one, though, is what I was saying is basically you use a photon if you're going to take a longer wavelength to a shorter. You take one photon, you jump up a level, then you take another photon, you go up another level, then you emit. And you can give out one.
Everyone see here that we are in Matt's pet subject.
Yes, this is so. My PhD area is spectroscopy. I deal with light matter interactions for a living, which is why I'm talking about this bit, because I was like, look, I find this really fascinating, but I know nothing about biology, so I can at least talk about how the light works. So when we see color, I'm not talking about computer screens or monitors. That's a whole nother kettle of fish. But if we're talking about shirts and things, so Jen's red shirt, it's red because it's absorbing blue, and we're not seeing the blue. The red is what's been reflected. And that's, again, to do with those rungs. There are a couple of rungs there that fit that blue energy really, really, really well, so that blue energy disappears when it hits it. So if you see plants, that means they're absorbing everything but green, which is really, really weird because our sun produces more...
we have a green star. We've actually had this discussion before, actually.
The most used color by our sun is green. Well, the highest number of photon count from a wavelength falls in the green. So yes, I've also got a small video on that if people want to check it out.
But it's also related to the way that the chemical chains work for creating the sugars in photosynthesis, in that certain types of energy are actually better for triggering the chemical reactions. So having a preference to other colors actually could be beneficial over green, which is interesting as well. Because
basically plants shouldn't be green is the takeaway. We're not entirely sure why they're green because it doesn't make sense. It's not the most energy efficient.
Well, you don't want fully dark plants because then you can end up with a point where you're actually getting too much in, and then your heat over. Yeah, the plants have to have a balance there, especially if you're in hot climates. But it would actually probably make more sense if plants were red and absorb the green and the blue rather than the.
They reckon life on Earth at one point was early on. So this is before you had plants. So it's just basically bacteria. They reckon it was purple for a while, and then basically all the green stuff, it basically killed itself, and then the green stuff took over.
I mean, we still get some plants that aren't exactly green.
No, you can get other colors, but the photosynthetic parts of it are always green, which is anyway interesting. But you could do a lot with light because of these interesting colors, and it works for elements as well as molecules if I start building them, making bigger ones. So I can use this to identify a lot of different things. That's why helium is called
because every element has a different set of absorption and emission spectrum.
Yeah.
For when it's
basically everything has a unique color.
Photons emitted during absorption as well, because you can have conversion of photons.
Yes.
But you know that better
normally
than I do.
You're not looking for that. So if I'm doing, say, absorption spectroscopy, which is most of what I do, I am not looking out the other side at a different wavelength. Like you do choose one wavelength because you'll never get the same wavelength back out. Some energy is lost unless the thing's transparent, in which case there's no point looking at it. You're not going to spot it. But you can do a sweep through the wavelengths and find out which one. So glass to us looks clear, but if you actually do it in the UV, it would be black. Most glass will, beyond about 200 nanometers, just absorb all the light, which is why you're not as likely to get sunburnt sitting next to a window than if you're outside. It's also why plastic glasses, so safety glasses, are good against UV, because plastic also is really good at absorbing UV, which is also why most plastic, if you leave it in the sun for long enough, will just crumble and fall to dust. As I've learnt with a lot of the small pieces fitting on the blinds around here, because they crumble after a while. If they've been sitting in the sun, you got to fix them. Because plastic's nice long chains, it's really good at absorbing UV. Yeah, we love all these science ones. So, look, that's all I really wanted to say on it. Yeah, we got some cool Tassie Devils, a few other ones. Still not entirely sure why they're doing this, but it does show that their perception of the world around them is a lot broader than ours. They can probably see things, or at least they interpret things that we don't. And yes, so yes, sorry, I was just reading Doctor's comment. Yes, that's true. That's one thing that the more that you learn about science, whether it's just the visual stuff, or I'm trying to learn about frequency space stuff because I need to control a lot of electronics. The world around us that we see is not how it actually looks. So the lights that are probably illuminating Jen and I are not solid lights. They're flashing and flickering. Most LEDs do that, but they pick flickering rates that our eyes can't perceive because it saves energy. However, that is why sometimes you can get caught out if your camera's got the wrong frame rate compared to that flicker rate, and you end up with this nice wavy pattern as they go down. And so that's why I can't turn on my other LED. I've got a little ring light here, which is less likely to flicker. But the battery ones do pretty bad. And that one does flicker. You can see it on this camera, and you can see it if I tried to film one of my regular videos with it. That and all the frequency stuff too is when you're looking at high like RF signals for, say, radio, phones, etc. It gets complicated. I've been looking at it for ages now, and I still have no idea what I'm doing. So I go too much into it because I want to show everyone how little I know on that one, because that's how science works. It's good at showing you what you don't know.
Well, that's the idea of it anyway. I mean, if all you ever read about was things you already knew, you don't learn much. No.
One day I'll figure out how it all works. One day. Well, I need to for my PhD. So.
Matt's going to figure out everything.
Well, everything I need to for the PhD. I got work to do on that.
Yeah, that's qualified.
I can build basic filters now, noise filters for electronics, which is what you'll need to receive most radio signals. Even the older Morse code ones, it wasn't actually just a single like pulse. You actually had to modulate it because you needed a tone that the ear can hear. So a solid constant wave doesn't do that. You actually need the amplitude to be modulated, even for the earliest of signals. And that often got confused in noise. That's why early radios were pretty terrible, because they couldn't filter.
Which is why we used to have big regulations about shielding on electronics. I mean, it's not as important nowadays because we have basically everything has a switch mode power supply, which takes a lot of the noise out of our electronics. But back in the day, where you had big transformers ramping down the electronics and everything was noisy. So you open up an old radio, it's got metal shielding around it. You open up an early 8-bit computer system, and it's got metal shielding around it because it had to, because everything made noise, and we didn't have digital radios and digital television that could compensate back then. And we used our radio signaling, well, we still do for everything. You have lots of people making lots of noise. You can't do it. Well, even now we have problems with lots of people making lots of noise. I mean, it really is a mess for radio astronomy.
Yeah, so I've been out to some of the bigger telescopes, radio telescopes included around Sydney. Well, they're 6+ hours out of Sydney, but it's because they have to put them in the middle of nowhere. And they have signs on all of them, turn off Wi-Fi on your phone when you enter, because those things are so sensitive. A single phone a few hundred meters from the dish being turned on will flash on their system.
I mean,
but they know what the signal looks like.
It's an old joke about the microwave oven being detected as an alien signal. But
yes, they did think that was...
It has happened. That's the problem.
They actually published... That was down at Parkes, so not far from here. That's for anyone who doesn't know, Parkes is the radio telescope that received the moon landing signals originally.
Yeah.
And they do a lot of radio astronomy. It is still going. The same dish has been used for how many decades? They have changed out the detector since then, and they've made it a bit bigger. They put an extra ring of wire mesh around it to make the dish a little larger. And yes, I can see Jenny's just written SOS in Morse code from memory.
Yeah,
because I think they're really easy signals because they're 3 of each. Sorry, I'm good at getting distracted, aren't I? But they've done this so much they can identify when someone sets off a Wi-Fi signal. But at Parkes, they had this mistake where they kept receiving these bursts of microwaves that would show up randomly, and they couldn't figure out what it was. So but they've measured a few of them. So they wrote papers and published on this phenomena. And there is a way. I have actually seen part of the dish. It was sorry, Peter's comment. Well, before I forget, and it was the first M movie I ever saw. So I was still a child when I saw that one. But I have seen it, and they've actually painted cricket stumps on the base of the dish, the actual telescope dish now. So because of the movie, and yes, they do have a gift shop that sells the movie and posters, etc. But we actually got to go inside it, so I've been inside the actual controls for it. They're still using a computer it's so old it doesn't have an operating system, and I believe it's an Apple one. It's an old wall thing. Because they don't need to. It works so well that they haven't replaced anything. They've obviously fixed up a lot of the software that controls it, but there is still a computer there operating that... Oh, no, we like the old stuff. But they kept detecting these signals, so back to what I was trying to get to, and they managed to figure out they were coming from this galaxy, because there are ways of doing it in terms of analyzing signals. Then somebody noticed that they seem to occur very frequently around lunchtime. So they're like, but it's not the right frequency to be a microwave. But they're like, let's just check. So they had someone go to the microwave and they ran it. The microwave didn't set it off, but if they opened the door of the microwave while it was still running, it set it off. So the older microwaves had something where they took a moment to slow down, and so they got a burst of energy, obviously, so it's powering down, so it was the wrong frequency to expect from a microwave, which is why they didn't pick it up originally. And they were like, okay, maybe we shouldn't have microwaves going off near this thing. So now there's no microwaves on site. But yeah, it was when the guy was going through it, one of the engineers there, he was so proud of how scientific they were in figuring out that it was the microwave. He's like, it may seem crazy, but this is how you do good science. We went through process of elimination and figured out that it was the microwave. I was like, yeah. So yes. So we diverged a little bit from the original topic, but I think that's
how you can tell it's science and not faith, is that it's self-correcting.
This case, they did figure out what it was. There is still another radio burst that we're getting randomly. They don't seem to be coming from this galaxy, and we haven't figured them out, but I've got to double check on that. Astronomy's not my field, even though I technically work in an astrophotonics group. Although we've had to all do a bit of astronomy for our one. I do like relativity. It's cool. Anyway, I think we can move on to questions. There's a couple already in the chat as we've been going through. And so I'm happy to do that. Although I do want to really quickly address Titan's comment here. That is why you always wait for it to turn off before you open the door. Yes, and kind of no, because it depends. The frequencies that are being used are actually not that dangerous to us. All they're going to do is heat us up a little bit.
It's why airmen used to stand in front of radar towers to warm themselves up.
Yes, though. There is one thing on it that I'll get to in a moment that reminds me of. But the modern microwaves should cut out pretty much immediately. These were older ones where there was something else going on, but it wasn't the expected result of shutting one down. But yeah, the idea that microwaves are so scary that you can't go near them when they're on, and then you have to wait all that time. Yeah, the waiting doesn't help before you open it, but it does help. There's no harm in it, but they're not scary. They're not going to kill you because you got a tiny bit of microwave. It's going to warm you up. It's what's
it's not ionizing radiation, so
yeah. But I know. But it's still a good point. I like talking about. It's a good segue because I do like talking about radiation because a lot of people do get scared of things like microwaves and cell phone radiation, and it's not that scary compared to everything else we face. And this is what I do for a living. I do deal with light. So now maybe are there some hidden biological mechanisms we haven't figured out that it can have an effect on? Possibly. Not ruling that out. Is there any reason at this stage to be fearful of them? No. So there we go. That would be my summary of it. Okay. So the conclusion to all that was basically, microwaves near giant satellite dishes and Wi-Fi don't work, and something about Tasmanian devils.
Which is why you have quiet zones around a lot of radio telescopes. Like, I mean, there are some real there are areas where entire towns are quiet zones, and you're not allowed mobile phones or radios or anything like that anywhere near these telescopes at all.
Yeah, that's also why they build them away from towns, even if they're in the middle of nowhere. They'll often try and build them just out in the middle of nowhere.
Sprouting up next to where the telescopes are.
Yes, some of them. So some of the ones I went to actually have small sections on them for living quarters for those who are operating them, and even then they're like, no Wi-Fi, you can't. I think they got plug-in things, but they're saying it's a problem because as the rest of at least New South Wales, for the ones I went to, was saying that as it builds up, it doesn't matter where you go, there's more and more Wi-Fi towers everywhere, so they're finding it harder and harder to stay isolated even in the middle of pretty much nowhere. So we'll see how it goes.
Now we need to build telescopes on the dark side of the moon. Not that the dark side of the moon is always dark, but it's always facing away from the Earth. So,
and it's well more shielded than most of the places here. But
you got an entire moon to shield you from the noise of the Earth.
But there's actually something to it. I remember this goes back to earlier we were talking about shielding of equipment from radiation. The really famous World War II fighter plane, the carrier fighter, because it wasn't a land-based fighter, it belonged to the Navy, the Japanese Zero fighter, had really poor shielding on its radios. And they still worked if you're around Japan or China. But when they came down and fought in places like Papua New Guinea and in particular Guadalcanal, where they got into a lot of fights with the Americans, the way the Earth's magnetic field was at the time, plus there was, I think, a bit of a solar flare, there was so much background radiation that you couldn't hear anything unless you're right next to the other plane. So a lot of the pilots ended up ripping the radios out because they're poorly shielded. You got nothing but noise unless you were next to a really loud transmitter. So ripped all these radios out, and there were cases where two squads would fly along, they go into clouds, one would get attacked and the other one would have no idea. Because even though they're a few hundred meters from each other, the radios were either that poor or they were missing by that point. And it was all to do with the latitude. If they'd been latitude, longitude, latitude.
Latitude,
yeah. That if they'd been further up or down, they would have been all right. It still wouldn't have been a great radio, but they would have been able to use them. So there we go, a bit of physics messing with some World War II battles. I do like that one. But it also shows how far we've come in our understanding of how to set these things up. Even chemically, we've come a long way since then. terms of even the most basic of things like explosives. Anyway, so okay. Oh, okay. So we got a few things I think we can cover. Let me just scroll back. I'll see if I can find a few questions from earlier. By the way, if anyone does have a question that I've missed from earlier, just to make sure I do get it, feel free to send it again in a comment and just tag me at the beginning, the Almost a Doctor, because it'll show up on mine and I'll see it. So yeah, I'm gonna move this on to open questions. No, I don't have a little intro video for that section. I will eventually get around to that. But yes, we'll call this, as I think, Jen, we might have a similar one on any other channels. I'm going to call this section "Flasking for a Friend." So yeah, you can ask away your questions.
Make us drink. We can play drinking games at this time of the morning.
Yes, too early here at least. Some mornings I'll have a tea though. Play drinking game with a tea. Although I don't think that counts. Oh yes, while people are, if there, I can see a couple of comments that I want to mention. But while I remember when you talking about people standing in front of the radio towers and the radar towers to warm up, the only study done that confirms that phone-based radiation has any effect is that the operators and the mechanics on the towers have I think, more girls than boys as kids. I think it's that way around. They have more of one sex than the other.
Affected by temperature.
Yeah. So so being slightly warmer actually affects the kid, but it doesn't seem to have any negative effect. It's just whether they're a boy or girl. It doesn't seem to change anything else. So yeah, and it's not likely the radiation, but just the heat.
Yeah. Yeah. Or basically, I mean, the low frequency microwaves basically just cause the water molecules in whatever's near them to vibrate, and that's how you warm your food up in a microwave, because you're just vibrating the water molecules with the radio waves. So we're 70% water, something like that. There's a lot of water in the human body to vibrate. It's not going to cook you. I mean, unless, of course, don't
hug a radar.
I suppose you could be like a frog in a thing. If you stood there long enough, you wouldn't notice until it was too late. But no, there's not enough energy going in there. But you warm them up, and you'd have. I mean, there's the famous story of the guy who had the chocolate melt in his pocket because he was standing in front of it. But, there's debates about whether that actually happened or not. But it is true that a lot of them knew that if they stood near where these towers were, they would warm up, especially in England when it was cold during the war. They just stood in front of the towers and warmed up.
Well, I mean, it works.
Yep.
Thank you, Jenny, for that. Not flashing that one up, but all right. Here you go. Here we go. Here's one from Doctor, and he's tagged me, so I've got to show this one. Have you considered doing a video debunking myths like men having a hot shower is more likely to produce a boy and vice versa? Not quite like that. I am going to take some of these live streams to do debunking, though, to probably stay closer to my areas, because that's getting a bit too much into biology and medicine for me.
Yeah.
But in terms of radiation, so 5G type ones, although I might do a couple of anti-vax ones, or at least chemical myths, because my background is also in chemistry. I can do things like the thiomersal and versus ethyl or methyl mercury, in terms of which one's actually dangerous. I can talk about that. So I probably will do some physicsy and chemistry debunks / takedowns. I'm still thinking I might even do one next week on that. I haven't figured out exactly what topic. I'm saving the 5G for collaboration I'm going to do with Maddie from Science Side Up, because we are going to take on a channel called Woodward TV, which was just...
Oh, you poor people.
Yes. It's painful to watch. I wouldn't recommend it, but it's grade A fear-mongering pseudoscience, I would say. Yeah. Probably the best way to put it. So I will do some debunking. That'll be more for live shows. I don't think I'm going to do too many organized videos on it, but there will be a couple of reaction ones. I am, though, and it's going to probably take a few weeks before I do it because I want to do more research into a few things first. I am going to do a live stream where we're going to go on the internet, and I'm going to show you that people selling lasers are lying to everyone. I'm going to show us that we're all being lied to about lasers. For example, just a little interest. So this here is a new laser pointer that I got. I bought it for $20 off Amazon plus shipping. Now, the sign on it says wavelength 532 nanometers, so green, which makes sense. It is a green one. Less than 1 milliwatt. You've seen my other ones. My other one says it's less than 1 milliwatt as well, and it's 20 milliwatts when I measure it with a proper detector. This one is more powerful. It is so powerful that it actually has a key interlock, and I could shine this brightly and illuminate trees a few hundred meters away from a house. I was on game to point it further. I actually had to be careful when I was going to point it up because the main use for ones like this is in amateur astronomy.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So I think Doc may, yeah, because of the delay. Yes, this would see the keys are on it. This one here, I could shine up really brightly. My guess is minimum 50 milliwatts, and they said it's 50. It said it's less than 1. The reason they said it's less than 1 because that's legal, so they just lie about it so they can get it through customs. Yeah, bought this off Amazon. In my case, at least, it's actually useful for what I'm doing because I'm coming up with safety recommendations for one of the astronomy societies. Plus, I work with lasers for a living. I have some idea of what I'm doing. You'll notice that it's keyed off, and I'm not turning that on here. I'm not shining this thing inside. But it's just scary how powerful this was and how cheap it was to get it. But yeah, I'm definitely doing a live stream on how dangerous that is and how we've been lied to. So that's another big one. All right. So yes, we got that. No, Davros, not going to fight you on shallow Earth. You just... Yes, make sure if you do research shallow Earth, you don't go too deep. It's the only thing. Yes, so I think, yeah. I haven't checked the match one yet, Doc. I will see about that. I should burst a balloon. Some of the ones that light matches, the reason they do it is the laser, even though it's a green beam. Yeah, that's the easy one. But a lot of the times they'll set fire to a match, not because the green light heats it up, but the original laser beam is actually infrared, and then it has it's like a filter, but it basically does that frequency doubling thing from earlier where you take in 2 photons and give out 1. So it converts it from a infrared beam down to a green beam. That and just the way they like the cheap manufacturing, you often get a lot of infrared leakage on these laser pointers. So that's the other thing that makes them really dangerous, is that even if the visible beam is not as bright, you can get a lot of invisible light. And our blink response is not. I didn't realize they did that
with the commercial lasers. Because you can get lasers of different wavelengths by using different materials in them as well. So you don't necessarily have to do it with them.
I'm not sure how common it is, but I do know a lot of them have infrared leakage, and that can also be other reasons, just the way they make the chambers.
Is that because
you have to be very, very careful? This one here
LED
is powerful
lasers.
enough.
Yeah, they're using an LED based laser.
Is an odd turn of phrase.
Yeah, I know exactly. It's a light emitting diode that's designed to be a laser, rather than which I suppose is the same thing, but
yeah. Anyway,
as in it's a solid state laser. That was a word I was looking for.
Yes, I think Doc's now talking about kind of focal beams.
Can we get a kyber crystal?
I have the feeling mine is almost more powerful without the kyber crystal at this point. If I put anything else into it, I will burn holes through the wall. We have to get through concrete and steel bunkers and doors.
It's just a ridiculous idea.
Yeah, I think there's a way of making them, but it wouldn't be with a laser. You can't. So I'm not interested. You can't make it with a laser.
Effectively, to do what a lightsaber does, it would have to be a plasma sword and not a laser beam.
Yes, unless you somehow put something at the end that reflected the light, but at which point you've defeated the purpose of it. So, yes.
Yeah.
Lasers don't make for good weapons if you're trying to shoot the laser at someone. They make basically as good weapon systems in that you tag them on to something that you shoot. And so that you use them as like a guidance thing or an aiming thing, or you use it to take out incoming projectiles. So you can use them, infrared lasers, and the military does do this to take out missiles. Is a really common one. You just aim an infrared laser and you heat it up before it gets to you, because the missile can't outrun light. So you just heat it up and it explodes.
So you're probably still better off with a railgun, because the kinetic energy that you have from a massive object moving at a decent speed is as much energy as you get out of the laser anyway. But it's easier to project an object.
Yeah, lasers are so inefficient. Don't use them as a weapon. Just you're better off taking all that energy and putting it into just launching something.
Don't build a railgun.
Yes. Or drop something from orbit.
Yeah, that works well.
Yes, by the time the gravity's done its work, one of the most efficient methods of converting potential energy to kinetic is to drop something into a gravitational well. So just let it fall.
Yeah, let's face it. If you're an alien species and you want to destroy all life on Earth, and you're patient, the best way to do it is to dislodge a couple of large asteroids and head them towards the center of the solar system. You'll hit Earth eventually.
And have them come from directions that we're not interested into. So dark areas of the sky that we're not currently doing astronomy on, and there's a good chance that at least some of them will get close before we realize it. There's a lot of empty space out there. Don't put it near something we're interested in, like the sun or another planet, because then we are watching those.
But even if we are watching them, we're unlikely to be able to do anything about it anyway.
It depends how early we catch them. Theoretically, Project Orion, the nuke-powered space flight, would actually get you, with current technology, 2 chances to take out an incoming asteroid, even if we only spotted it about a month out. We don't have an
Orion-based spacecraft to do anything with at the moment. So if you see something coming, you'd have to have a good 20 years lead time for us to be able to do something about it.
It's still basically if... Sorry, also
sorry to shatter everyone's illusions. We whilst we have lots of ideas on how we could deflect asteroids, we haven't actually implemented any of them. So
yes, that's the other one. Because so far none of them have come close, but clearly paleontology and basically the history of this planet tells us we will have to worry about it at some point.
Yeah, so that's why actually we should be worrying about it now and actually experimenting with how to make these things work.
Yes. Our best bet at this stage is just to get a really solid, fast rocket and just slam it into it.
Yeah, early enough that it deflects it. Yeah.
You don't need to make much of a deflection if you can get it a couple of months out before it will miss.
Or gravity tractors, if you've got enough time.
Enough time. Oh, well.
It's the same problem with impacting something into it, though, isn't it? You've got to have enough time, because you make a small difference, but that difference has to add up to enough difference to miss in the long
run. Well, hopefully it's not something we have to worry about.
Is nuke it, because nuking it just makes lots of smaller ones which still hit the Earth.
Yes, if you're actually going to try and save the Earth from an asteroid with a nuke, don't put it inside it. That's not going to help. Put it on the outside and hope that the energy and momentum from the blast pushes it the other way, like a small rocket engine.
Actually, if we
that's your best
there, that is bet. One thing we could do. If we had the time and we could get to it in time, that would be one thing we could do. We take a whole heap of nukes up with us, put them along the side, outside of the large thing, and you trigger them. Not one up, in sections. You trigger them so that you get this propulsion. Yeah, basically attaching an engine to the side of the asteroid to push it out of.
It's a nuke-powered engine. Still work. It would work.
That's how you probably get to it in the first place with an Orion.
Yes. So the thing's there, and you probably set off a couple of hydrogen bombs would do it for a bigger one too.
Oh,
anyway,
yeah.
So I just want to take a moment because I know a lot of people have arrived in the chat that I haven't said hi to. So I can't remember who I haven't at this point, but welcome to all those who've joined recently. And so I know that we've got Randolph and Jenny and Davros have all shown up. And welcome to you guys. So if I missed anyone, please feel free to wave your hand around metaphorically in the chat. And of course, we are taking questions. So just ask whatever you want. I don't care what topic it's on, as long as it's science-based and it's not going to scare the kids away, you can ask it. I know that's a big ask for some people, but hey, there we go. And there we go, Nikki, you are waving, so I'll wave back.
Hey, Nikki.
As well. So yeah, no, I'm happy. We've had about a dozen people on.
I haven't watched Don't Look Up yet. I've read some reviews on it, and that, yeah, it seems interesting.
Yeah, premise, I saw the trailer for it. That's sorry.
I remember what other people said about it.
that was, yeah. Maybe I should do that. I was watching. It was actually somewhat interesting. I don't know if anyone here has seen it. It was I think it's the Korean one, the Silent Sea. It's basically set on a lunar station on the moon. It's interesting, and parts of it are done really well. Some of the science with the water stuff is really stupid. But you got to give some people artistic license. It was definitely a unique take on that. It's a lot of suspense in space, but it was not exactly what I expected. But it was fine. I did enjoy it.
Having audible explosions in space, I'm like, yeah, no.
Yeah, they had a couple of moments where things crashed and there was sound, but that one I am a little more forgiving on because audiences really don't like silence. So it does sound a bit awkward to have none. But it is still cool if you can just have a purely visual impact in space. That would be cool. Wish we saw more of it. Hey.
Actually, if you had an explosion on the moon, because I mean, the moon does have an atmosphere. It's very tenuous, but it does have a.
And look, space isn't a perfect vacuum either, so you could still have minor sounds.
And the moon,
it wouldn't be. It'd be very dull sounds, but you'd still with a good enough.
What I'm actually thinking is, if you set off an explosion on the moon because you create a pressure wave, that would give you a slightly more dense area as the pressure wave hits you, but the pressure wave would hit you before you heard it. So you'd get the effect of it, and then you'd hear it, and it wouldn't be very loud, but you'd still feel the pressure wave. But the pressure wave wouldn't be as strong as what it is on Earth either, because there's not as much atmosphere for there to be a pressure wave.
No.
It'd be interesting to know what it's. It'd be interesting, and you could probably do the calculations for it to be how loud would an explosion sound at different levels of atmosphere, and how strong would those pressure waves be in comparison to being on the Earth?
The only thing is such a low pressure, you'd also have to try and figure out how long it will take before it'll just
dissipate,
fizzle out. And also,
yeah, that's true. Probably the moon's atmosphere would be too low, but Mars compared to Earth. Hi, Vesta.
Yes, I mean, Venus would theoretically, you'd be able to hear the explosion, no problem. It's just anything you send there is dying of everything before you get it there.
Yeah.
Venus will kill anything before you probably got to get much use out of it. Explosive.
The fact that all space
atmosphere. Yeah, its atmosphere is made of acid and it's hot enough to melt lead. So that's why it was the Soviet Union took 21 plus tries to actually get anything done on Venus. They were successful in the end. They just had a lot of failures.
To be fair to Star Wars, that was an actual choice when making the movie, that they wanted the fight scenes to look like World War II dogfights, even when in space. That was actually a design choice because the advisors that they had about it said that's not how it would happen in space, and George Lucas said, but I want it to look like this. So it was a deliberate design choice for Star Wars to have fight scenes in space that look like dogfights on Earth.
I think a lot of it is
that most people, if you looked at the way that spaceships would actually move in space, they go, that's weird, because you can do things in space like be flying in a direction, turn around, and you're now moving backwards, but you're facing the enemy that was directly behind you, which looks awesome, but is not particularly realistic for us who are used to an atmosphere and gravity. However, it's what they did in Babylon 5.
Haven't seen that one.
If you watch the Star Furies flying around in there, they'll do things like that. That they flying in a more thing. They look more like you'd expect something that was flying in space, and they will fly and just flip straight around and attack the thing that's coming in behind them if they're fighting something. But in reality, you probably wouldn't have little aircraft having fights like that. Space battles are going to be more. Space battles would be more like ocean battles with large battleships, where you're firing huge, great big missiles at somebody else.
Yeah, your best bet is just to launch a lot of objects and hope the other one can't get away from them. But the thing is, if you're going to have a space fight, particularly on the scales that these movies show, you wouldn't be doing it close range. These would be fights that probably happened over several months, because you'd have, once you spotted them, assuming you've got the optics to do so.
You could spot them, because little tiny spaceship, lots and lots of space. It is really hard to see something.
But even once you spotted them, once they got close enough, given that a lot of these movies show they've got fancy detectors, if you can spot them at another planet, so like another 1 AU distance or more, because some of them seem to be able to do that. I know Star Trek seems to always have the long-range detectors, and Star Wars does as well. You wouldn't be having a fight at close range. You'd be launching objects with planned trajectories from ages away. And yes, you'd be trying to divert them, but you'd try and set up webs that make it difficult. So these wouldn't be quick fights at close. They'd be slower fights at longer ranges, just because of how the nature of it being so open. And so that's I know that doesn't make for as good TV, so I'm not as fast on that one.
Especially a battle that could take months.
Yes. Again, depending on when things are spotted. One of the ones that is pretty ridiculous was the Moonraker battle in space. If anyone knows what I'm talking about, the old James Bond one. They have a bunch of lasers, and they do a Wilhelm scream in space. And you're like, no. And you've got the sound with explosions. You've got people right up next to each other. You got lasers which have bolts of energy, and it's like, yes, maybe Moonraker should have tried the whole thing of the card maneuver.
We can see the laser on the no. We see the laser when it hits something. You don't see the laser going through. The only reason you could get any idea of where a laser is because it's hitting dust in the air. Because you don't see the laser until it hits something. So if you're in space, you don't see the laser until it hits you.
But as I said, they make bad weapons, so you better. So maybe they're all meant to be.
All you have to do is make the surface of your ship a little bit reflective, and you're done. The laser's useless.
Yeah. The other thing that gets me though, while we're on this, is shields in movies, and I'm not talking people with big shields in lines, because I could go on for ages about how poorly done ancient battles are, but I'm talking about like the electric or the force field type shields that they put around most craft. So yes, Independence Day is a bad one. Star Wars does it, like Star Trek. So when you have a shield, it's not actually that helpful in space, because yes, let's assume that the shield works perfectly, as you can't break through it. It's like a metal that doesn't break. It's because that's what they seem to like showing. So the other thing that they all seem to forget is that conservation of momentum and conservation of energy is still a thing. If I smack your spacecraft, even if you've got a shield, I'm still knocking you around. I am, in the meantime, going to bring up this because I may have mentioned this on another stream. But
not only that, if there is no such thing as a one-way shield. If you build a shield around something, somebody who might not be able to hit your spaceship, but you certainly can't shoot back at them. You're stuck in the middle of the shield.
This is for this. If anyone wants a nice historical example,
your shields are depleted. Your shields are depleted. That means you've got no energy, so you're screwed.
This is my favorite example of why shields. Yeah, again, that energy has to go somewhere. You got to shake things to bits. This is the ISU 152. It's a World War II Russian SPG, or self-propelled gun, which is SPG is basically like a tank but doesn't have a twisting turret. So as you can see here, the gun is somewhat fixed. It can move a little bit, but you don't have a twisty turret on it like a typical tank.
Yeah.
I think the barrel from memory is about 150 millimeters. It's a big boy, this thing. This thing is huge. On paper, that gun didn't have the muzzle velocity or the projectiles had the armor piercing capability to get through the armor on the heavier German tanks, the Tigers and the Panther, for example. However, this tank destroyer got the nickname Beast Killer because it didn't matter. It didn't matter if it didn't get through that armor. If you hit someone with a shell with that much kinetic energy plus the explosive, it literally just shook the enemy tanks to bits and the crew inside them. So they didn't actually need to get through the armor. It was just like a massive, massive, God-sized sledgehammer that you're hitting into the side of the enemy tank. So yeah, that's the thing that gets me with those shields. That, as you're saying, Jen,
yeah, it
doesn't matter if I hit you with a missile and that missile explodes on your shield. I'm still pushing your spacecraft. If someone had a shield that somehow is deflecting all my weapons, I'm just going to launch a bunch of nukes and detonate them right in front of you. That's still going to do damage. So,
and not only that, if you're dealing with energy weapons, the only way you're going to stop them is if you've got a way of blocking out most of the spectrum of light, which means you are now blind. You can't see what's happening outside of your shield as well.
Now, you could do shields against being detected. You can make coatings that, at least in theory, you could do something with a negative refractive index. So when light bends in water, it normally bends away, but you can make it bend so that, if you get a negative refractive index, basically if you have like a circular or cylindrical object, you can have the light go around it and then come out the other side at the same angle. So to someone standing at a distance, you can't see that you're there. That is theoretically possible, and people are looking at making materials that have negative refractive index. But what you have to do for that is speed up how fast the light travels through it. And they do it, and even though the light has to jump between molecules, it should theoretically slow down. There are ways of doing it where you can do some fancy chemistry and physics. There are some huge
advantages, though, if you're talking about that in space, because basically space is black, and lots of things distort the way that you see things when you're in space anyway. So a ship that didn't actually change that, the only time you might pick them up is if they go across something that is very bright, like a star or a planet. But if they're against the backdrop of a star field, just the background of space, you're probably not going to see a ship that's got some sort of metamaterial to reflect the light around it. Hell, if you paint the spaceship black, you might not see it anyway. Little tiny ship, lots of space. That's the thing. I mean, even if we get to the point of having ships, spacecraft that can move at a appreciable portion of the speed of light, and even if we were looking at sending a 10-year mission, say to Alpha Centauri or something like that, would you really need to take weapons with you on that ship, just in case you encounter something? Because the chances are, even if you do encounter another species, you're not going to end up in a fight because it's too complicated.
Yeah.
And if they've got technology so much more advanced than us that a fight for them is easy in space, then you're not going to win it anyway. So,
and the other thing is, we're far from home. If they're somehow established there, then it doesn't really matter if we've got weapons or not. They're probably going to deal with us. But that's the other one people talk about, alien invasions of Earth. Even if you got close enough that we didn't notice you immediately, and that's not impossible if you come from one of the darker sides and we're not looking and they're smaller spacecraft, particularly if you paint them black, good chance we're not going to spot them unless they go in front of something we are looking for. And if there's a bunch of them, maybe we'd make it out. So that's the only thing, yes, that some movies get right, is that you don't see them until they're quite close. That bit would be true under most circumstances, assuming they don't go near the sun or a planet, as I said earlier, because we watch those. They wouldn't get within our atmosphere without us noticing, though. By then, they've come well within range of most of our detectors. We'd spot them. Though, if you came across the universe, even if they had technology that was far above ours, they won't be able to beat us in a fight, because the amount of energy and the amount of effort it would take to get here and the amount of material they'd be able to bring would be so small. And given our current level of technology, particularly that we have nukes and we have a lot of them, and guided missiles, this assuming country, well, actually you wouldn't need a lot of countries, you just get a few like America, and who has a bunch of them. If you came with a fleet, you'd just launch a bunch of missiles and you'd make it incredibly painful for any alien trying to invade.
Yeah,
as we've already discussed, you could have all the shields in the world. Oh, sorry, Jim.
Who had seen any of our television broadcasts, any aliens had seen that, would go, yeah, that planet's more effort than it's worth. Because there's no real advantage to coming to a populated planet unless, of course, you want a slave labor force. That would be about the only advantage of coming here, that you want the life forms to use as a slave labor force.
We're not likely to submit to that. We'd make it quite painful for whoever was trying to do that.
We'd make it difficult for them, and we'd put up a fight because physics. We're actually pretty good at destroying shit.
Yes. Although here's a question, Jen, I've just noticed. Have you got an answer to this one? Why is there a fridge light but no freezer light?
Because you're less likely to go to the freezer in the middle of the night to grab a snack than the fridge. I think that's a fair answer.
Yeah, I just think because, well, yeah, I don't. I mean, although midnight ice creams.
No, yeah, that's.
But that. Yeah, I know. Although I don't know, Jen, if you got an answer, because I don't do particle physics very well. Gravitons, what are we looking for apart from axions and dark matter? It's really hard because that's not my area. What I really need to do is
we don't know
chat to my friends.
I mean, they're theorized particles because they should do, because when you have an interaction of anything, there should be like there should be an equivalent to the photon for gravity, which is what graviton is. So it's the particle that transfers the effects of gravity. However, given what general relativity says about gravity, and that it's a curvature of space and not actually an interaction in the same way that the electromagnetic spectrum is, you may not need a graviton, which might mean why we don't actually have a quantum theory of gravity, because of the nature of gravity. Because we tend to think of gravity as an actual force, whereas it's a pseudo force in the same way as when you're talking about centripetal and centrifugal forces. One's a real force and one's a false force. We could describe it as a force, but it actually isn't. And
it still acts like one.
It still acts like one. Yeah.
For calculations and actually doing physics within a rotating frame, it's useful. But yes, the actual centripetal force is not necessarily a thing. It's just the effect you get from being accelerated towards a center while basically in an orbit.
Yeah. So what you've got with gravity is, because things want to move in straight lines, which has got more to do with inertia than anything else. Gravity is equivalent to inertia, but in a bent space-time frame. So when we're talking about gravity, it's actually the effects of inertia, because you're constantly falling because of the effect of bent space-time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Also, sorry, and now trying to get the other question. Sorry if I ever miss any. Vesters, is that a movie reference? Sorry, maybe it's a bit beyond. But Jen,
the Space Above and Beyond was a TV show.
Okay, sorry, I'm not familiar with it, so sorry.
I'm trying to remember what it was about now.
Anyway, so I think this question was answered in the chat, but I can do this one really quickly. So why is a pizza box square when the pizza is round? Because, yeah, you can manufacture square things really easily. Round things get very difficult. So for most beer, I know this is slightly different, but I still like this fact. The most expensive thing when you have a glass of beer in front of your bottle of beer is the label. The actual beer and the glass itself are cheaper to manufacture than it is to make the label and put it on a curved surface. So making things round in mass production is not terribly easy if it's not like, say, drop something in and then you just get like a round blob of something.
There are exceptions to that. It is easier to make something with curves on it in glass or a metal because it's easier to roll.
Yes, if you're heating up, but if we're talking about
a why cans are round and not squares.
Yeah,
cylinders are easier than squares.
Square stacks better, although they're more difficult to hold. Yes, so when you're melting it is, but in terms of when you're actually physically grabbing things and putting them together with machinery, it's easier to do the square stuff.
So why does Davros think he's won again? Is that about the graviton? Is it because I
maybe something about shallow Earth
as a fake force? Is that what it is? Flat Earthers go for it because it doesn't matter whether you think it's a gravity is not real or not. The effects of gravity are real, regardless of how we describe the force itself.
So here's this one. If tomato is a fruit, is ketchup a smoothie? No, I refuse to accept that one. I don't care if that puts me in science denial live. It is not a smoothie.
Well,
no, originally it was sold as a medicine.
Generally speaking, you don't shove salt in a smoothie, whereas you do in tomato sauce or tomato paste.
But I am going to ketchup was originally sold as a medicine. It was like a vitamin supplement cure-all. Yeah, something like that. I don't remember the specifics, but it was medicine originally. So try to get through the... not too bad. So why does your rud and your feet smell? So I'm not sure about the smelling. That's more to do with sweat, and we sweat in a lot of places. Though there's two different types of sweat glands, and the bigger ones that produce the nastiest smells have the bacteria associated with them because the bacteria that make the smell. And you find those in around the groin and the armpits, and I think maybe around the feet. That's why those areas smell worse. Whereas, like, say, your back doesn't tend to smell as much, although generally once you've been sweating a lot, it doesn't matter. I'm not sure exactly why, again, this is not really my one. In terms of nose running, I think that's actually to help clear it of particulates and disease and microbes, actually keep it clean. That's an easy, particularly when it's cold, it helps to flush stuff out. So that's the thing. It's also why if you look at
create the smell. It's not actually our sweat that smells; it's the microbes that basically eat the secretions.
Actually, that's pretty much everything about humans that smells. It's not us; it's the microbes that live in or on us.
On us, yeah, that smell.
Yeah. All right. What else have we got? Oh, okay. Got to. Why is it called an elbow and not an arm hinge? I don't know, but I know that there's most of the names that we have for body parts are all Latin or Greek. So I remember someone studying anatomy, one of my friends who studied anatomy at university was saying, it actually helps that I studied Greek and Latin more than it did biology in terms of passing this anatomy course.
Because of the names, yeah?
Yeah, because the names are fairly self-explanatory if you're in the Latin or Greek. It's just we don't use that.
And now they're arguing about condiments.
I like making onions, caramelized onions, to go with anything. If I'm going to put tomato sauce on it, it's normally a burger. I don't tend to put it on steak or chips plain. Yeah.
It's getting towards lunch for you, Matt. You're going to be wanting a burger too.
No, I cooked barbecue yesterday for family, so I'm fairly barbecued out. I don't feel too much like a burger. There's still leftovers. Maybe get some chops or something from it. Did a potato and garlic bread on it as well. And I grilled up pineapple on it at the end, mainly for family because I'm I'm not a huge fan of pineapple. But there you go. For anyone who thinks that I'm at war with you over pineapple, because I know Claire is still around, I'm not. I will cook pineapple. It just doesn't belong on pizza. Sorry.
Exactly.
Why kneecaps but no elbow caps? Oh, there's one from Davros. This feels like deja vu, this question, but I have no idea. My guess is probably protection.
Probably because you don't kneel on your elbows?
Yeah, you don't tend to rest the elbows on as much, and we've got muscles. Muscles just work differently. I'm not 100% sure of that one, but interesting biology questions. But yes, by all means, keep asking the physicists about biology. Maybe we'll
limbs evolved. That would be the thing. You'd have to look back at how those particular limbs evolved to see why they are the way that they are. So, and as neither Matt or I are biologists.
Yeah, that's just it. For the particle questions, I really should talk to some of my friends who are particle physicists or have specialized in those areas and see if I can get them on. I had a couple who might come on. So that yes, Davros, you are correct. I said ask anything. But you may ask anything. I'm only pointing out the irony that we're being asked questions that we clearly don't know the answer to, but we're trying
which is always what happens in these sort of streams, Matt. You should know that.
Oh, I know that's happening. And even when
it's why I used to call mine Stump Jen, because that was generally what people tried to do. Ask questions I wouldn't know the answer to.
No, when I say ask me anything, I mean ask me anything. You can try and stump me if you want. You can try and quiz my physics. You can try and quiz other areas. But with biology, if I don't know it, I'll just be like, yeah, I don't know it. And it's biology, so no one expected me to know it, hopefully.
I'm guessing it's got to do with the way that the limb actually is, because of the movement on it. Probably the knee joint actually probably needed more protection being on the back limb. But, because the front and rear limbs work slightly differently because you've got different angles of the joints. So because the knee joint is more a forwarding facing thing and more likely to get hit, whereas these ones fall backwards away from things, even on we evolved a protection system for them, which we kept when we stood up. But I don't know. You'd have to look into the evolution of it all and exactly what happened, and you'd have to be an evolutionary biologist probably to know the answer to that one. And even then, it might be one of the ones that they don't know the answer to.
Yes, there's a lot of it, like why we still have hair in certain places. We're still not sure. Why do we keep hair? I mean, the top of our head kind of makes sense if you think about sunburn, but then again, we evolved that before some people lost enough melanin in their skin for that to be a problem. I guess you can still get sun damage no matter how much melanin, so maybe that's it. But like elsewhere, like why can men still grow beards? Like, why is that a thing?
Because women obviously like them.
Yes, but what's the reason?
I mean, I know we don't want to talk about it in that way, but I mean, a lot of evolutionary traits came about for mate selection. So
it looks cool, yeah.
Yeah,
So to Jenny's question next, is it true that if you fertilize Vegemite, it will grow in a garden? I can't see that it is, because it's a yeast extract. It's not actually, well, I mean, it's not actually anything that would grow, I imagine. It's nothing there that would.
You can actually use the yeast extract in Vegemite to ferment stuff.
Yes, but that you're not going to notice much because you're not going to grow crop or anything.
Yeah, you're not really growing it, so you're not growing it.
You're not going to see much.
We are taking ironic questions seriously.
Hey, that's what we do here on our channels. We take those silly questions and we try and put science to them, because apparently sarcasm is not our forte, and this format seems to work, so I don't mind. Yeah, but see, to Krabby, most of our face doesn't have hair on it, so it's to our earlier one, to keep your face warm in winter. Yeah, it didn't make too much of a difference to my face in winter, although we do live in Sydney.
Both men and women keep beards. If it was needed to keep warm, then surely both sexes would have kept facial hair.
That, although Jenny does have a good point, that is one of the few ones for hair in, say, places like armpits that has been proposed. I think as of yet, no one's actually been able to do a study to prove if that's a major factor, because it's not an easy study to do. But some people suggest in certain places to reduce friction. But then again, why can I grow a moustache and beard? So yeah, but there's probably a lot of different reasons for it. Eyelashes definitely, and eyelashes are always a third of the diameter of the eye, because that is the ideal length from fluid dynamics for you to get like a protection around the eyes in terms of air to help keep dust out. So it doesn't matter what animal you are. Pretty much every mammal has eyelashes that are about a third of their eye size.
What about eyebrows, though?
I don't know.
Is that to stop? Is that on humans to stop the sweat coming down into your eye?
It could. If you think about them, a lot of them are angled sideways, but some people don't really have many eyebrows. Others have more.
Yeah, because we've evolved away from having them to even more so now.
Oh, thanks, Davros. Davros, keep it clean. No, I'm not too fussed about that. I just, as long as it's not too bad. But anyway, it is still technically the correct scientific phrase. So anyway, I think, not too many more questions. I think the chat's just having a go over the last few.
Yeah. We've covered a few topics.
Well, we've gone over a few. Still want to go for a few more minutes, so if there's any more questions to do that.
Yeah.
I think, as I said, if coming up week, I will do one on lasers and why they're lying to us. And I will also do a debunk of something one week. So I'm still not 100% sure what we're going to go for. It'll be a physics or chemistry topic, as I said. Oh, here we go. Why do my eyes change color? They go from green to brown and black again all the time. I've never seen anyone else like it. That is actually interesting. So I'm not sure, but what I do know is that our eye color is related similar to our skin color. It's a single chemical. I think it's related to melanin levels as well, but it's a single dye or chemical in our eye that changes the color. So yes, all colors is to do with one chemical. And you can put all of eye colors on a scale between like that kind of really pale gray blue all the way through to kind of dark brown and sort of blackish eyes. I'm sitting right on the border of brown because there's a slight green tinge. You can't see them in the cameras to my eyes. And so I'm on that level of it. And it's a level. So it's not you have multiple colors and you get one. It's you're somewhere on that scale. So all I can think of there, Doc, is that it's that level for you is somehow changing. It's that, or somehow it's the light that affects it.
Oh, good question from Claire.
Wait,
all these biology questions. That's a good question.
Red, green. How do we see it? Well, yellow is a composite color. So the way we see other colors is we combine the sensors going off for the other ones.
And our brain interprets those things as color.
Yeah. So it's a good chance that what I see as yellow is not what everyone else sees as yellow, although I think we're fairly sure most people interpret it.
Well, we all agree on it because we've all learnt what colors are called.
But that doesn't mean...
That's linguistically proven because in different societies, a lot of societies didn't have a name for the color blue because the perception of blue, not that there wasn't blue, but the perception of blue was it was a variation of green, which is no different to us, say, like having technically what we say we've got pink and we've got red, but pink is red.
There we go. Finally had a bot show up. Sorry, Jen. Just have to... Sorry, I think I've got that. Oh, yeah, no, I got into the chat. I was wondering if we're going to have one because they've been really showing up on everyone's stream. Sorry, Jen, I didn't interrupt you.
No, that's all right. So what you've got is from a linguistic point of view, you've got all these different things where we've different cultures have different names for colors and have different, maybe less or more colors depending on how culturally important those colors were. there was actually a debate for some time: did people in the past not actually perceive blue? Whereas obviously we did, because our eyes haven't changed that much in the last 2,000 years. But that culturally we didn't perceive them in the same way. It's a thing here. We learn to perceive the colors based on the way we teach about, like we learn about them as we grow up. So we all perceive red as red, but actually how our brain interprets those colors is probably different inside everybody's head. It won't be significantly different because our brains will evolve similarly, but exactly how Matt perceives red might be different to me, might be different to you, Claire, but we wouldn't know that because we all call it the same thing.
To me, it's useful. It doesn't matter as much in spectroscopy because we define it by wavelength. So we all agree that red light is the longer wavelengths, closer to 700, or well, between about 600, 700. Or a bit above 600 anyway. And so to me, I just refer to the wavelength. So it's all right. But yeah, it is still an interesting point in that.
And I mean, we should all see a similar progression of colors like you get from the rainbow and within the spectrum because of the order of the light frequencies and stuff like that. So there may even be an argument for saying the way colors are interpreted in the way in our brains is actually the most logical way to do that. But yeah, basically, we see each of the colors because we are rods and cones. Well, I can never remember which way around it is, Matt. Rods are black and white and cones are color. Is that right?
I think this is remote asking for names in biology.
Yeah,
so I think we both know how good we are at that.
But you've got your rods and cones, whichever one is that does color. You've got a certain number.
I have an appropriate batter.
Certain amount of each that are more that are more susceptible to certain frequencies of light. And actually, we have less for detecting. I think it's for detecting actually green within our eyes than we do for the others. But our brain interpolates the colors anyway to pick that to interpret the range of colors that we can see. There are actually, if you go to cephalopods, they actually have 4 different types of cones. So they actually see across a longer thing of wavelengths. All of them?
Because I know birds have 5. There's some cephalopods. I thought certain like cuttlefish, they reckon might actually be colorblind. They only have one.
Yeah, some of the cephalopods I think have 4 different types of cones.
So there's definitely one that only has one.
Yes, you did. Well, you do. You get variations within species as well.
And but they can still determine color because they can camouflage themselves with color. So they reckon that if our chemical analysis is correct, what they're doing is relying on the fact that different wavelengths will bend, so refract to different degrees. And so they actually see a slight range of the picture in their head and can interpret that as color, which is still another brilliant way to see color because it's still a physical phenomenon that you can interpret. It probably takes a little more brain power, but it's clearly very effective because they're really good at color camouflage.
Our eyes are so badly evolved, though.
Oh yeah, which I think also goes to to Doctor's comment, because I do want to address this one briefly. Your eyes are see upside down and backwards. It's your brain that interprets it. There's a study where people wore upside down glasses, and after a few days, they started seeing correctly. Yeah, your brain is really good at correcting for things. What makes it upside down is actually the lens in the eye. So when the light passes through the lens, it gets bent down, and then, if you're looking at the top of the lens, that'll get bent down, and then the bottom lens light hitting the bottom gets bent up. I could do a ray diagram, but I'm not sure how to draw for these streams yet. And so once you cross that focal point, now the top light's gone up and the bottom light's gone up and the top light's gone down, and you've inverted the image, and you can just change the orientation all the way around before you realize that you've inverted the image completely.
Our brain is really good at this. This is why we can lie on our side and watch television, because our brains just automatically turn things around, and we don't even notice it's happening because our brains have gotten so good at dealing with the fact that, you can turn your head from side to side and everything in front of you still looks flat. Yeah, we've got absolutely great gimbals in our.
Yet there are still a lot of problems with them. They do a good job because evolutionary, these are the things that we need them to do.
Our eyes are so badly evolved that it is weird, and cephalopods don't have this problem. Oh, I love cephalopods. Our eyes evolved that the actual nerves that connect up to the rods and cones actually come through to the front of the eye and connect from the front of the eye. So every single one of us has a blind spot in the center of our vision, and our brain has to compensate for it by making our eyes move very slightly whilst we're viewing anything to fill in the gap.
I remember showing someone
so
I remember showing that so fairly recently to someone who's quite young who wasn't aware of that. And I did the 2 dots on the paper and I said, cover one eye and stare at the other one and just bring it in. And when they got to the point where it disappeared, because they'd never heard of that before, the look on their face was, this is so cool, but it's like, it's creepy. Because it is weird. Our eyes do have dark spots and we fill in the rest. Our brains are pretty good at compensating for the failures of our eyes.
Our eyesight isn't as good as what we think it is either. Most of the work done by our brains to keep a really good image in our eye is really central to the actual image that we're looking at. And it's only because we don't move our eyes all the time that we get a good solid focus of the entire image in front of us. Because everything peripheral to that little tiny bit, if you can focus permanently, everything outside of that is pretty much out of focus. Because the focus point for our lens is so small, and the number of rods and cones central to our eye around the out. There's more rods and cones around the outside of where the nerve ending comes through than there is further out. So any light that goes out further from that on the eye has less rods and cones to pick it up. So we actually get less things. So our brain does a lot of work with the muscles in our eyes to get a full image into us, and we're just not aware of it because our brain just goes, oh yeah, I haven't got a really good bit for this little tiny bit of the image that's in front of us, so we'll use the bit we had before.
But it's good at compensating because it's not how you'd make the system in the first place. You don't build a system with those flaws that you have to fix later,
which shows that it evolved because it evolved with flaws because it evolved from just a little light sensing bit of tissue that
it just has to be good enough to work. And although it's impressive, this is what you need for it to be functional. So it needs these minimum, but it doesn't have to be better. Which is why we have so many eye problems. I don't know. Maybe Jen's got one. So Jen, you've got an answer to this other one talking about eyes. So when Vislas are born, they first open their eyes. They have blue eyes that fade to grey, ending in a warm yellow-brown with no visible white as the dog matures. Why? I don't know the answer to that one.
I don't know.
I haven't got anything for that.
I guess like most dogs, when they first open their eyes, they can't see very well. So the eye is probably still forming to a certain degree. And it's probably not until they get that full pigmentation that the eye is completely functional. There's probably too much light being let in from outside of where the pupil is when they're younger, and it just takes a while for it to form. But I honestly don't know. That's a good question for a biologist if we have one.
Yes. I actually might have a few suggestions for this one as well while we're on the topic of light. This one is closer to my area. LEDs are way more efficient than most light bulbs, so you tend to get a narrower band, so you're not going to lose as much heat, and also why you can change their color really easily because you can just choose it. And if you look at white LED lights, it's actually a combination of about 3 colors put together. So you can actually see, if you look at them, you can actually see, if you took a spectra, you could actually see 3 distinct peaks, or at least I've done that, or 2 or 3. It depends on the bulb and how broad it is in the exact white. The other thing is because they're so efficient, they're also fairly narrow band, and that's not what most white light sources look like. But yeah, I know what you mean. I find it really weird sometimes looking at those LED lights. I think that's why a lot of car manufacturers have switched back, or at least here, I'm not sure about the rules, also later comment too, that they have kind of moved away from that to at least lights that aren't as piercing or annoying to the eyes.
Yeah, you can really tell an artificial light source when it's an LED over
because it's much narrower than what you'd see in nature.
You're only dealing with a handful of frequencies from the
but that being said, Yeah, it's more manufactured, but street lights are really orange, but they're only a handful of frequencies too, because it's emission. Well, the orange street lights are. There's newer ones that are more LED based. But the thing is, yeah, I think it's just the way they've made the car ones, because you can definitely make them that are less. The light I've got above me and the ring light are both LEDs, but they're manufactured to mimic a much broader spectrum that looks a lot cleaner. The ones that always get me when I'm driving are the bluer ones. I think maybe it's just because maybe we're more sensitive to blue light, or we're not as used to seeing it.
Having said that, if LEDs and LCDs didn't work the way they did, we wouldn't have the monitors that we have. Because they're narrow frequency, it's a lot easier to polarize the light that comes out of it and make sure it stays consistent. And because we can polarize light, we can switch the light on and off really easily, which is why we can have LCD panels. And even OLEDs work the same way.
While you mentioned OLEDs, so the O is organic and just means the chemicals they're using are organic chemicals. The blue stuff has a shorter lifespan because the shorter the wave, the more energy, they're more likely to break down. Roughly, that's oversimplifying things a lot, but the blue is harder to maintain. So a lot of the OLEDs that you buy now kind of cheat. They actually have twice as many blue emitters as any other color, because they'll burn out faster and they have to kind of switch between them.
Because they have compensators that work on little areas of the screen, so they can actually detect their own brightness and adjust for it.
So they kind of cheat with the blue a bit.
That's why OLEDs have great blacks on them, because they actually have sensors within the screen that detects how much brightness is coming from each little area of the screen, and they can adjust how bright they make those areas of the screen, which is why they can extract, and you can get the really deep dark blacks and things like that. But that would make perfect sense, because you've got that level. You could actually detect if an area of the screen is starting to lose a bit of blue, so you could actually brighten the blues up in that area automatically to get better color production.
So there's actually a lot of work going on about making better organic blue sources, because to do that you need to mess with the electronics. Getting red sources and even green is not too hard for organics or even inorganics, but getting blue starts to get harder. It's why blue and purple dyes were so rare in the ancient world, that it's not something that's easy to form, and so nature doesn't tend to make it as much. If we think of the things that are blue, it tends to be from other things or large bodies of water, because water does absorb a small amount of red, but you need a lot of water to notice it. And the sky is blue not because of absorption, but it's just scattering the blue light towards us. So we just end up seeing it. But anyway, I do like this question because I can answer it. This is directly in my field. This is kind of what I was getting at earlier. So when we're talking about these ladders in molecules and you go up certain energies, that the difference in the height between the rungs is what determines the color. Sodium, its ladder has two rungs that perfectly match. These are big bands that are easily accessible, by the way. Bands, I'm just talking about those energy gaps in the orange part of the visible spectrum, two very, very bright orange parts. They're right next to each other. So to our eyes, unless we've used like a prism or reflection or transmission grating to spread the light, so when the whole image of pass the white light through a prism and you get a rainbow type thing, to our eyes, we can't tell the difference between that. So it's just one bright orange color. And it's just because, sodium is what was used in most of these street lamps, and it's this orangey yellow color. So that's why they'll appear orange compared to a lot of the newer ones. I don't know about other countries. I know in Australia, a lot of them have been switched out for what looks like LEDs, although they're doing a better job than the cars, or at least other sources. I don't think
it just matters as much with the street lights when they're being LEDs, because they're either a long way away from us or they're directly above. But with car lights, they're what's coming directly at you when you're driving at night, and I hate that. What I really hate is when they make spotlights out of LEDs, because generally speaking, what you've got is, first of all, if you're driving it towards somebody else, remember to turn your spotlights off. Don't drive around with them on anyway, you idiots.
In country problems, it's too busy around here. No one drives with. I will use them in darker streets, but only briefly.
The new brighter LEDs tend to have a refresh rate that's just on the borderline of people being able to see it, which is one of the things that can really irritate you, because to get that extra brightness out of them, they're leaving them on slightly longer, so you get you're pushing more power into them so that they get brighter. But a side effect of that is they flash more, which should be all right, except they're getting close to the borderline of when it's perceptible by some people, especially if you probably worse as you're younger, because our perception to things like that as we're younger is greater than as you get older, because our brains slow down. No, they don't. But yeah, so that could be part of the reason why some of the new lights you don't like, especially if they're the ultra bright ones. I don't know why we have to have ultra bright LEDs anyway on car lights. It just drives me insane.
Yeah, I think it was more LEDs are efficient. Let's try and do it. And hey, look, they look cool. And it's like, yeah, not when they're driving towards you. But that I did mention that flicker rate earlier, so it's a good kind of callback to it as well. Although we'll probably finish up soon, so just say that to future questions while I remember. Though, yeah, it's a weird one, but the flicker rate you can see in cameras, and I've now completely lost my train of thought. So let's have a look. I think
actually that
flicker rate Doctor had something that was relevant to what we were mentioning earlier.
Sorry,
Jen.
Go with this first, and
there's a slight delay. If anyone's listening, we're not deliberately interrupting each other. It's just hard because by the time I hear Jen, I've already started. It's like, oh, sorry.
Vice versa. Yep.
Yeah, that's fine. So this one here. So I think Jen, you might have mentioned that earlier.
We were talking about that. Yeah, it's a suggestion based on language, because language is one of the things I love to talk about. Because a lot of early languages, the Romans did this too, where the sky was not described as blue; it was described as an aqua type, as a greenish type color, or an orange, which you would get an orange if you're talking about sunsets, and you would get a thing. That's on the not showing blue in skies before a certain period had more to do with the availability of blue pigments,
which is what I was also going to add.
Very, very hard to get.
Blue and purple,
so it needs to be possible.
Yeah, if I was like, I can go and find colors out just even in around the house, like natural ones, like I can break up some stones, etc., that will give me, red, orange, even green. Oh, I mean, green's not too hard if you use organic matter to find pigments for that, but blue is not easy. There isn't anything, because I said it's more to do with the electronics, that molecules that are blue are quite hard to make. So, because you have to start extending the length of the molecule to do so. It's also why nothing seems to absorb or emit. Well, organic stuff doesn't seem to absorb or emit in the near infrared, so just above red, so it gets more hard. You actually need to go towards quantum dots for that.
You basically get more purples because you've got more red in that. But so your chains aren't quite as long as a true blue. So there's not that many flowers that are true blue in color, and even in that case, a lot of those become more blue because of the way the light's refracted more than the actual color in the.
Yeah, it's not because they're absorbing and then they're absorbing red.
So you can't use that as a pigment. So there's a lack of bluish pigments. There was a handful of them known in the old world. They were very expensive, so they were used very rarely for anything. So if you painted a painting back then, it's cheaper to do an orange sky. So it was the availability of it was availability of what was there, or a slightly green sky, and that made it cheaper, made it easier. So, and it's why, yes, blue was a royal color, because it was so expensive to get blues. If you were affluent, you could have blue, and it was a sign of you being affluent.
Yeah, and we know this. Rome is a good example. It was, for a good portion of the Roman Empire, illegal but death sentence illegal for anyone other than the emperor to wear all purple, because it was that much of a status symbol that only he was special enough.
Yeah,
pretty much
languages described the ocean as ocean green, and you had sky green as well. Some of the ancient languages did this, and we go, they couldn't see blue because they're describing it as green. Well, no, they could see the blue. It was just that in the same way that we don't always, like I was saying, we distinguish red and pink, but in other languages, people don't. They're exactly the same color.
Yeah.
It's still.
Well, I guess that's also back to answering, I think, one of Doc's earlier questions on the yellow color, because I described the color as orange and Doc was saying yellow, but we both knew what we're referring to because it's on that. It's not too far off being what a lot of people consider yellow. It's just, to me, that's more orange in my head. So yeah, there's a bit of that, but it doesn't mean that we're perceiving it as a different wavelength. It might just be how we classify the colors. But still, yeah, one of the ways to make a purple dye was actually from a chemical made by a sea snail. And so there was a few places in the Mediterranean that manufactured it. I think there was one in North Africa, Tyre, or around Lebanon did it. I don't know. There might have been another place. There's not many places that did it. It was few locations, and
artificial
it was
blues
not easy.
Came a lot later from mixing our own chemicals and things like that. But even then,
the first
quality and the cost of the blues was always high.
Yeah, the first manufactured blue that I'm aware of was Prussian blue, an inorganic compound, and it was a really big cage-like structure. So, yeah. All right. Well, I think we're getting, because it's been, I was aiming for an hour and a half and we've got an hour and 45. So I'm going to finish this up a bit here. If there are any last comments from anyone, please pop them in the chat now while we do our finishing up. But Jen, you got anything else to add or anything you want to shill before we head off?
No, I've really enjoyed that. That was a great discussion about color and language and things like that. That one always fascinates me. We're, in response to two of the things we talked about, the fact that we see colors differently, there's a great video on SciShow that they did about 5 years ago about how we perceive color. If anybody knows of the YouTuber Tom Scott, he actually recently did a video on the language derivation of colors, which is really, really fascinating. I may put them both out on Twitter later on if anybody's interested in seeing both of those, because they cover this topic really, really well. And Tom Scott is actually a linguist, so he knows what he's talking about.
Yes, well, that's good. Everyone knows who I am, so I don't need to shill here. I am going to do my next proper video, so non-live one, will be on why green lasers. So yes, why green lasers?
That's a weird way to phrase that, but cool.
It is more specifically going to be on why do amateur astronomers use green lasers. So why would you use the green one? I'm not going to spoil the answer here, so that will be for that. But anyway, I also want to thank everybody in the chat for showing up, because the Q&A doesn't work without people to ask those questions and give us stuff to talk about. I was quite happy with how this went. So yes, I am planning to do one next week because I'm still off. After that, whether these will be weekly or fortnightly, I haven't yet decided. That will probably depend on my PhD. So it may end up being fortnightly, and then I'll do a couple of special ones to fill in gaps here and there if I've got something on my mind. But yes, there will be more of these Q&As, and there'll be more of science topics. Next week will be a debunking one. I'm still deciding exactly what that is. I'll let you all know. And so until next time, everyone, be like a proton and stay positive.
Bye. Matt's pressed the wrong button.
Of course it is. Hey, guys, it's the second time I've done this. No, this is the correct button.